Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a mature Pomerol. I've recently decanted this. This is Chateau Bourgneuf. It's their 1995. Now, up until about 2012, evidently Bourgneuf was known as Bourgneuf Vayron in some markets and simply labelled as Bourgneuf in others. This is because the chateau had been owned by the Vayron family. In fact, it's still in the ownership of the Merlot family, but has been owned by them since the 1840s. In the 1970s, Xavier and Dominique Vayron took over the property, and today, and in fact since 2008, their daughter Frédérique is now in charge of winemaking at the chateau. The estate is about 9 hectares in size, which is a pretty normal size for a right bank property, so much smaller than the estates of the Medoc. Near neighbours include Terroir and l'Église Clinée. It's located on the plateau, on some gently sloping terrain, and coming down the slope you start at the top with clay soils, pure clay, move on to more of a clay and sand mix, and then at the bottom of the estate there's an area of gravel. Plantings are predominantly Merlot, which is pretty normal for Pomerol, with about 10% of Cabernet Franc making up the balance of the vineyard. I don't have an exact blend for this particular vintage, but looking at information on the blend, which is pretty scant, it seems generally to be about sort of 85% Merlot to 15% Cabernet Franc. The fruit is hand-picked, and picking goes on parcel by parcel. Vinification goes on in temperature-controlled concrete vats, and there will be regular pump-overs to manage the extraction of colour, tannins and aromas. Following vinification, the wine ages for 14 months. In small French oak barrels, barriques, 225 litre barrels. Of these, about 35% will be new barrels, and the remaining 65% will be second and third fill. So there will be an oak component, both the flavour and the structure of the wine. Just to talk about 1995, relatively mild winter and spring. There were some spring rains, but they didn't interfere with flowering. Flowering went ahead without interruption. The summer saw record temperatures, and the fruit achieved good ripeness fairly quickly. However, some late rains did mean that some of the Cabernet Sauvignons were picked early, and for this reason, actually Pomerol is one of the appellations within Bordeaux that excelled in 1995. So I'm hoping this will be a really quite interesting wine. So let's have a look at it. Looking at the colour, there's a medium to deep intensity of ruby red. It's quite a dark pigmentation, but it's not completely opaque by any means. Swirling it, there's very little evidence of high viscosity on the glass. It's only 12.5% alcohol, so that's sort of what I was expecting. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Smelling that, there's a little bit of restraint actually, but you've got notes, initially quite savoury notes, sort of leather, earthiness, maybe a touch of truffle. Then you've got sort of high-toned, overripe fruit, almost sort of prune notes. Touches perhaps of raisin. So let's taste, shall we? That's quite a classic, and perhaps you could say a slightly old-fashioned Pomerol style there. The wine's completely dry, obviously. It's midweight. It's got a lovely smooth texture, but there's some sort of quite ripe, deep, dark plum sort of fruit. It's not that primary aroma, but sort of dark plum through cooked plum, prune. These rich, quite opulent flavours at the front of the mouth, but then they're overlaid with really quite savoury, earthy, perhaps heading towards truffle note. It's not quite to a mushroom stage, which I would say would gone sort of past the ideal. There's some quite reasonable freshness as well in the mouth. So the acidity is in there with a good balance. The alcohol is not impinging on the palate whatsoever. The tannins are very fine. There's an almost velvety nature to the mid palate. It's just so smooth. It's beautiful. There's an element in which there's sort of slightly grainy, very fine, dusty texture, almost like cocoa powder or something like that. And there are notes of sort of smooth cocoa. There's bitter notes. There's a licorice note in terms of the richness, but then also sort of touches of coffee. The wine finishes relatively savoury, and yet there's a sort of a sweet ripeness which is almost textural. There's a sort of rounded smoothness, and almost like sort of sweet dried fig, tiny touch of sultana. It's a high ripeness, slightly raisin sort of note. And there's this constant interplay between the rich fruit and these more savoury tones there that really are absolutely fascinating. I mean, pairing this with a dish, I could think of drinking this with something like a truffle risotto would be incredible. It really is a complex wine, and matching it with the right sort of thing. I mean, if you're looking for a wine with primary fruit aromas, this is not the wine for you. But there are sort of layers of complexity that I just find fascinating with this wine. Certainly not the smoothest, richest or most opulent Pomerol, but a really nice traditional style that would go beautifully with a wide array of foods with this sort of beautiful savoury nature. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope you found the tasting interesting. If you have, please feel free to press the like button. Do share it with your friends if you think they would be interested. Do sign up and follow us on YouTube. That would be fantastic to see your support there. Any comments, please feel free to leave them in the box below. We'd love to hear your feedback about the wines, about the tastings, or about anything else related to them. But most importantly, I do hope you'll make some time to join us for another tasting in the very near future. And also, happy Christmas.